Hi guys, good afternoon and welcome to the exciting world of buffer stocks. This is primarily for my Year 12 students who were in New York last week on a school study visit, whilst the rest of us were slogging away on a past paper question with regard to buffer stocks, in anticipation that this may be a question on the summer exam. So when we went over this on Friday's lesson, there was a lot of things that we needed to develop relative to what we had previously considered in lessons many months ago when we looked at this when we were doing the micro course. So for the benefit of you, those of you who've been in New York, I would like to go through this once again, and hopefully during your half-term break you can watch this and get yourselves up to speed on exactly what you missed. So, buffer stock schemes, as you'll know, are schemes which are used in agriculture particularly in order to try to maintain stable prices and hence stable incomes for farmers. And the textbook diagram, which is this diagram that you see in front of you, has three key features. Number one, we have a supply of an agricultural crop when there is a shortage. We have a supply of an agricultural crop when there is a bumper harvest or a glut, as referenced in the text. And we then have PG, which is the guaranteed price. So this is the price that the, in this instance, the Common Agricultural Policy, for example, is trying to maintain via the use of this buffer stock scheme, this buffer stock program. So, why is it important? Well, simple, straightforward analysis of this diagram shows we're trying to maintain this price PG. In a shortage and in a poor harvest, the price would shoot up, but also the quantity demanded and supplied would also shoot downwards back towards the zero. In the time of a glut and a bumper harvest, supply shoots right. Good news for the consumer, price drops. Bad news for the farmer, income drops. Quantity demanded and supplied go up. Now, there are other things that we could say here with regard to elasticity, but we'll not get into that just at this moment. But one of the things that you may wish to just comment upon would be, of course, that the volatile nature of price swings in agricultural markets are exacerbated by the relatively price inelastic nature of both demand and supply, and therefore small changes in one, either or both, bring about large changes in prices and hence incomes for farmers. So let's get to a little bit of analysis on this diagram. So the simple analysis, the simple Peter Smith textbook analysis of this one is that we are trying to maintain this price PG right here, which would be QG. So if there was a very severe frost and harvests were poor and the supply curve ended up moving away to the left to supply shortage, then price would shoot up. And so the buffer stock scheme would come into effect here and would intervene in order to restore the price back to PG. Now, how would that happen? Well, in order that that would happen, because supply is here and we want price to be here, then the buffer stock scheme would have to release into the market and we'll have to sell into the market in order to increase supply and restore the price back to PG and QG. So that in effect is the amount of additional buffer stock which would be released back into the market. If on the other hand we had a fabulous harvest and the price drops, quantities demand and supplied increases, well again that requires some type of intervention here in the form of the buffer stock scheme, and in this instance because there is too much being supplied here, then the buffer stock system would once again intervene and buy up any excess in order to restore price back to PG. So a few simple things that you can say about this would be obviously that this is what you're selling, this is what you're buying. So in this instance here, and given the nature of the elasticities of the curves that we've drawn, what we're buying here is bigger than what we are actually selling. So the notion of how sustainable a buffer stock scheme such as this would be comes into question. Buffer stock schemes, of course, need to be constantly moved on and recycled because they're generally perishable goods. And again, you don't want to be buying masses of perishable goods because that is really throwing money down the drain. So that, from a financial point of view, would be rather silly and rather imprudent, one would say. And other things that you could say about this would be that, generally speaking, you're selling into the market when the price is high and you're buying when the price is low, so there may be some opportunity there to make some type of revenue gain. However, the extent of that, of course, depends upon always how much you're buying relative to how much you are selling. So let's just go back to this whole notion of buying and selling into the market. If we look more closely at this guaranteed price of PG, when the supply shoots up to here, at a price of PG, this is the quantity supplied, and this is the quantity demanded, obviously, because it lies on the domestic demand curve. So demand is greater there than supply. And as you know, if demand is greater than supply, that causes prices to rise. Hence the reason why PS, price shortage, is greater than PG, price guaranteed. So in order to remedy that, what's the buffer stock scheme in effect doing? It's meeting that excess demand which exists between these 2 points. And hence the supply curve is shifting, in theory, from S shortage back along to S, let's call it S3, so that price is maintained back at PG and quantity QG. That's in effect what's happening, although in your textbook that's not the analysis that's developed for you. And what about when we have a bumper harvest and so the supply is much greater than the demand? And let's just see if supply is greater than demand. So when, let me get an appropriate couleur. So at the guaranteed price when we're in a glut, this is the supply, but once again this is the domestic demand. So that's supply, that's demand. Supply is greater than demand. With anything, as you know, basic economics, when supply is greater than demand, price drops. Hence we're going from P guaranteed to P glut. Call that P glut, shouldn't we? So how does this be remedied? How is this problem remedied via the buffer stock scheme? Well, we have stocks being bought up. We have excess supply being bought up. So in effect the demand is being shifted from D domestic up to D2 in order to try to restore the price back up to the guaranteed price again. So this in a way is when you come to look at, for example, fixed exchange rate systems, or if you look at the ERM, the exchange rate mechanism, and the way in which currencies are bought and sold in the forex markets, it's a similar sort of concept that's going on here. So that is the diagram in your textbook. Now, rather confusingly, when you then look into the essay, and I said it's a past paper essay, but it's actually one of the sample assessment materials from OCR, they on the mark scheme, they don't even use this particular diagram. The diagram that they use is this one, where we have inelastic supply curves, the normal demand curve, and we have prices marked on, and this is rather confusing again, could cause confusion. Prices marked on as P max, for the maximum price is P min. Thinking really in terms of a ceiling price and a floor price. The reason I say that is slightly confusing is because you will obviously be familiar with drawing a minimum price diagram where P min lies above the equilibrium and a maximum price diagram where the price lies below equilibrium. So don't get those two confused. But for the benefit of those of you who are absent, I'll just run through what the Marx scheme says. I mean, it's fairly similar in regard to its interpretation. So here we've got supply, here we've got demand. This is obviously the equilibrium, initial equilibrium here, P1. And so our interpretation here is that whatever happens to supply and demand, we're always trying to maintain the price within this band here. So as long as you're somewhere in between P min and P max, then that's okay. So you could be down here, you could be here, you could be here. So that's slightly different to the previous diagram where we had a set price which we were always trying to maintain. So this one we've got a sort of a range. How big that range is, we don't know, but obviously we wouldn't anticipate that it would be a very wide range, because then from the point of view of the whole policy and income and price stabilisation, then that's not really a workable solution if you have an enormous spread between max and min. However, what your Marx scheme is saying is, well, if this is initial supply and then you have a fabulous bumper harvest, then the price will move to P2, equilibrium. Now that has then dropped out of the P max, P min limit, and so that requires some intervention via this buffer stock scheme in order to either buy up or sell into the market. So in this particular instance, we need to be obviously shifting demand upwards, because we have got too much supplied in this instance. So we need to shift demand upwards so that we get the demand curve intersecting on the glut line somewhere within this remit. So for example, if I shifted it to there, to D2, where we have a new equilibrium here, then we're back within the boundaries of acceptability, and so this new price of P3 is acceptable in that respect, and the buffer stock scheme has restored prices back within the range. So that's one interpretation of it. The other interpretation of it is this. Again, this is our equilibrium, P1, and the other interpretation you're given in your Marx scheme is this. So we're told, or it's suggested to us, that the demand curve shifts, say, to here, to D2. So moving from an initial equilibrium of P1, we're now moving to here, to P2. Okay, so we've got excess demand here at this particular price. And so the solution here is, again, we need to sell into the market, and so we would shift the supply curve, release buffer stock in, and that would then lower price down, and once again we will lower the price down within here. So if, for example, this was, oops, let's take that back, that didn't work right. Try that again. Yeah, so if, for example, this was the supply curve and we moved it from here to here, so let me just move those labels along, S to, don't need necessarily to call this one glut, you could just call it S2 or whatever. So releasing into S2, then we restore the equilibrium price back down within these acceptable limits. And again, that's another way of interpreting this buffer stock scheme. So those are the diagrams. I think, particularly for my students, your whole analysis and interpretation of this needs work, I would say, with regard to the essays, and certainly on that last Friday, the previous Friday before half term, this is some of the analysis that you've missed. So I hope that's of use, and see you again next time. Bye for now.